The deadly disease that affects more than 1 million people worldwide each year.
Well, it's an infection of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. And it's caused by a variety of bacteria.
And also, importantly, with fungal meningitis, there's no transmission from person to person.
In South Africa and elsewhere in the world, the ministries of health etc. have recognized this as an important disease to prevent. And vaccines have been introduced into immunization, routine immunization programs.
It's really important to prevent, and the best way to prevent is to have people know their HIV status, start antiretroviral treatment as soon as possible.
For all your health news, join Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
What is the public's perception of the role of a general practitioner?
The GP is there for the whole family and to advise on the health and to refer you to specialists if necessary.
The role of the doctors is to look after our families and us. And now things have turned it around. They are milking our money. We really to go to the doctor, I apply my meds before I go to the doctor. I rather do to look after myself or to go to the chemist than to go to the doctor.
The role of the general practitioner is just to assess where you have problems. If you don't feel well, if you feel any form of uncomfort in your body, then this is to assess and help you out.
You go there when you're sick. Things like flu, stomach bug, things like that. Yeah, the general practitioner will help you for sure.
So people clearly have different views on the role of the general practitioner or GP or family practitioner. Now, are they there to simply milk your money, as somebody just said? Do they help you and your family with all your health needs? Do you only see them when you need a sick note and rather see your specialist when in need of help? Well, today we discuss the general practitioner or GP. We'll be joined in studio by a practicing GP and the Chief Medical Officer of Discovery Health. With the help of our guest panel, we'll take a critical look at the role that the GP plays in our healthcare system. Now, you may want to be part of this show by asking the panel some questions or simply just sharing your views with us. The number to call in that instance is Johannesburg 714-6918 or 6919. You can also tweet us at SABC Health Talk, or simply just interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Now, we're going to go for a short break, after which we invite you to just sit back, relax, and learn from this exciting show ahead. I'm Dr. Selomit Daung, and this is Health Talk.
Jumbo Africa, welcome to the newsroom. I'm Elvis Preslin.
Let us build our continent brick by brick, stone by stone, until we achieve.
Plus, had asked the court to review and cancel the contract after adverse findings by both the Auditor General as well as the Public Protector.
Well, Christianity is under attack globally. It has been from the beginning of time.
Get all the dominating stories locally and globally on Newsroom every Monday to Friday from 9 a.m.
What guides us? Is it something you can see?
We need deliverance from sin because God never.
Hear.
Carry on working to spread the message.
Feel.
To the whole world.
Or touch. What leads us onto greater experiences? Is it the words of our sacred texts? The advice of our elders? Or is it the actions of our people? The strength of our beliefs? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people, and your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
My name's Andries Nienauber. I am a general practitioner. I work for a company named At Health Family Practice. We're a group practice, and I've been working here for 4 years. A doctor is a healthcare professional who takes care of his patient's health, be they sick or taking care of their future health. My responsibility is to consult with patients, ascertain their needs, to work out a diagnostic course. Do we do certain special investigations, or do we go with a treatment plan, and helping the patients to make good choices involving their health. Our work environment's mostly desk-bound and patients on the bed, so you're on your feet a lot as well. I wouldn't say very little administrative work, because it's basically your patient's notes with each consultation, not only to remind you the next time what you did the previous time, but also so that other doctors can see what you have been up to. Typical hours, what you make of them. We're open from 7 to 6, but most doctors start off as 24/7. Especially when you're working as a student intern or as an intern or in your community service, you do a good 40 hours per week, and then anything between 80 and 120 hours overtime per month. You do night shifts every few other nights, you do weekend shifts, 24-hour shifts, 36-hour shifts. So that all depends on where you're working. Personality skills for this line of work is a lot of patience, not only to fill your chairs, but also because sick people can be quite draining. You do really see people at their worst, and you need to have deep empathy for that, and then also patience, because sick people can be quite impatient. You need to be confident, you need to be calm, have nerves of steel, especially under emergency situations. Advice I would give to future doctors is know why you're doing this and stick to it. Keep your eye on that goal of where you want to be one day, and don't lose yourself. It's always glamorous to see on TV the smart, pretty doctors, but it's not always like that. But it is a lot of fun, and it's also a lot of hard work.
So patients can be impatient at times, we hear. Well, let's learn more about what the GP is, what role the GP plays in our healthcare system. And in our studio we have with us, well, we've just heard another view of a practicing GP. We have another practicing GP in studio, and this is Dr. Kabelo Motsepe, who's in general practice out there in Centurion. Dr. Motsepe, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers at home.
Okay, dokes. And we have with Dr. Motsepe, accompanying Dr. Motsepe is Dr. Maurice Goodman, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Discovery Health. He himself obviously is trained as a medical doctor, but now obviously involved in administration. Welcome to Health Talk, Dr. Goodman.
Thank you for having me.
All right, perhaps let's start with you, Dr. Motsepe.
Yes.
What does it take to become a GP? Tell us about where you started, where you trained as a medical doctor.
Actually, medicine was not my first choice. My first choice was actually engineering, but medicine was my second choice, and because that fell through, I went and I pursued medicine, and here I am. It took 6 years undergraduate. I qualified at the Medical University of South Africa, known as Medunsa, and after the 6 years of undergraduate, it is 1 year, then 1 year of internship and 1 year of community service.
Well, people watching this program, perhaps, you might get people that have ambitions of becoming a doctor. Just take us through the study period, that 6 years that you spoke about. Was it tough?
I would say blood, sweat and tears describes those 6 years quite aptly. It took a lot, but I also think the duration of the 6 years helps you really focus and know whether or not it's a calling, because it has to be a calling. It takes quite a bit, long hours, you know, a lot of sleepless nights, literally blood, more blood than you've ever seen in your lifetime, and a lot of tears, dealing with loss, dealing with illness, loss of life, that's what I mean. And it takes quite a bit out of you, but like I say, after the 6 years you realize it is a calling and you'll stick it out because you know that it actually speaks to who you are.
Right. So you have a practice now in Centurion.
Yes, I do.
I presume you grew up around the area, in the
I
areas?
actually grew up in Garangua in the northwest.
Okay.
And I happened to decide on Pretoria, because it's my hometown, to open a practice in Centurion.
Just now you said something about it's a calling.
Yes.
Your choice of opening practice in an urban area versus a rural area. Obviously, we're not saying go to the rural area. just your view, and you know.
My choice was really based on the fact that I'm born and bred in Pretoria, so that for me was an easy choice. I think most times you want to serve your own hometown or you know your own community, so to speak. That was the primary drive for me.
Okay. Well, Dr. Goodman, let's talk a little bit about statistics. So maybe, before we get to statistics, let's talk about training. I mean, you deal with a whole lot of doctors, clearly. I mean, that's part of the game in the medical aid industry. Your comment in terms of the quality, maybe not so much the quality, but the content of the training through medical school.
Sila, thank you. The quality of our doctors in South Africa, historically and currently, is superb.
Right.
I just happened to read, there was a ranking of universities, not to boast about my alma mater, but Wits Medical School scored within the top 100 medical schools globally. Our other medical schools are also very competitive. So the quality of the doctors coming through our medical schools is excellent.
Right.
Problem is that there's far too few of them. We have a Discovery Foundation that for the last decade or so has been investing in medical education. We've invested close to 200 million, mainly in postgraduate academia. But pursuant to setting that foundation up, we did a lot of research. We currently have about 7 doctors per 10,000 population in the country, which is about a third of what we should have.
Right.
We have 8, soon to be 9 medical schools which annually put out about 1,200 new doctors a year. And as my colleague said, they then go through an internship and community service. So there's a bit of a delay before they can practice fully. But in short, we've got great doctors. There's just too few of them.
So, but what can be done to increase the number then? Is it about building new medical schools? There was talk recently around, you know, private medical schools. Your thoughts on that?
So the Department of Health has done a lot of work in a number of areas. Firstly, they've laid down the challenge to the medical schools, the existing medical schools, to say they should increase their throughput. Clearly, that's a challenge. As the pupil to clinician or teacher ratio grows, one needs to be sure that the quality maintains. Medicine is, again, as my colleague said, and as you know, it's a hands-on profession. There's, they used to say, if you don't put your finger in it, you put your foot in it. So, you know, you've got to have, you can't overload the classes and the clinical training. However, the medical schools are increasing their throughput. There's been talk of new medical schools opening. There was a cohort of medical students who, in fact, were sent to Cuba who are starting to come back into our system now. So there are multiple initiatives that the Department of Health has put in place. And the private sector, quite frankly, should and does come to the party also to increase that throughput.
I mean, obviously, there's differences between, you know, the private sector and the public sector also in terms of, you know, the numbers. I asked, you know, Dr. Motsepe earlier around, you know, what prompted her, or at least what made her decide to set up practice in an urban area. There's clearly differences between urban areas and rural areas. Your thoughts on that?
Clearly, and again, the statistics prove that. or those numbers I quoted you, there's a much higher concentration of doctors in the urban areas. The rural areas are certainly underserved. And again, there's a range of initiatives that have and need to be put in place to make sure that those populations are also adequately served.
Right. So, some people have actually said that it's just far too easy to set up practice. What did it take for you to decide, I want to set up practice at that corner or at that complex?
Oh my. It took quite a bit of research, I must say, looking into the area that I was considering, looking at the patient demographics as well. I think, though, just to add to why I chose an urban area over a rural area, despite the fact that, you know, I'm from Pretoria, it's also because I realized that with increasing urbanization and the increasing growth in the working middle class, there is a need to have doctors in urban areas, especially doctors who can relate to the very patient and population dynamics in those urban areas from a cultural point of view as well. And there really was a need to have more of us in those areas.
Right. Taking it from what she's just said now, and the ease with which, you know, people are able to set up practice, we hear stories coming through of bogus doctors. You pick up a newspaper, you get told that Dr. So-and-so has been arrested because he's been running a practice and he's illegally, he's running an illegal practice because he's not qualified. How big a problem is that in that country?
It happens, but quite frankly, it's on the margin. Each doctor that qualifies has to be registered with our Health Professions Council, and annually that registration needs to be renewed. And there are fairly robust systems in place to make sure that that happens, and that in fact, in terms of the CPD system, continual professional development or education, that those registered doctors keep up their clinical training. There have been a couple of cases just in the last few months, exactly as you say, of bogus doctors, and we need to be vigilant.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about another related point, though, because all I said, notwithstanding about the excellence of the training in our medical schools, one area that's lacking is any kind of business type training.
Yeah. Perhaps this is a good point for us to break, because this is an important part, but I want us to talk about it after a break. Time for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion on the role of the GP, and this time perhaps let's just get a bit of what people think about GPs. Please stay with us.
We're talking news, business and sporting updates both continentally and abroad. South Africa is in its first economic recession since 2009.
Currency has appreciated quite a lot, especially for this year. And it has benefited from a number of things, not so much to do with what was happening here at home.
The Islamic State-linked news agency Amaq claims the latest attack was launched because of Australia's backing in the US fight against the group.
Constad is one of the dozens of women who have accused Cosby of sexual assault, but hers is the only case recent enough to be subjected to criminal prosecution.
Stay tuned to News Today at 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday on SABC News.
with the stories of abuse from the other 8, but they haven't been ready to pursue any angles. They've offered their support, they've offered the comfort to the 8, and it's been an amazing journey.
It feels like your heart actually literally sunk in your shoes.
It wasn't a long encounter. I think at the time I froze.
The way the criminal justice system deals with sexual violence is problematic. And I don't know, unless there's a fundamental change in many things, the way prosecutors deal with the victim in the matter.
For all investigative insights, stay tuned to Special Assignment every Saturday at 17:30.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur 4th tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Who are patients more comfortable with when they are sick? Is it the general practitioner or the specialist doctor?
I would probably look at an expert GP, because an expert GP is found in a range of maladies, and a good GP is worth his weight in gold.
I'll rather go to a specialist. Reason being, it's because there are no queues there, and you can even make an appointment and you get quickly attended. I'll not go to a local clinic because of the service is so poor.
Choices as far as GPs and specialists are concerned. Today you get specialists for every little thing, you know. I mean, you have a problem with a small thing, and there's a specialist for it. So what is it all about? What is it all about? Is it really about providing healthcare in this country, or is it about providing or making money?
I would prefer going to a specialist.
And why?
Because while going to a general GP, would rather say going straight there, they're going to inspect you, see what's wrong with you. I would not prefer that. I would rather prefer going to my specialist, getting treated straight away.
In my opinion, I'd prefer to go to a specialist, because you're given the necessary attention. A specialist is more accurate in terms of addressing whatever problems that you may have. The convenience, the efficiency, it comes at a cost, but if at all you want good service, quality comes at a cost. But now if at all I'm going to have to go see a general practitioner, I'm going to be inconvenienced by having to wait in a line. I'm going to be inconvenienced by having to reopen a file, the whole lengthy process related to seeing a general practitioner, and you're not too sure whether the quality of services that you're going to receive are going to be of a standard that's similar to that of a specialist.
Lots of stuff that's really coming through about an expert GP, quality of service, the inconvenience, and so on. Let's continue our discussion in studio. We have Dr. Motsepe, who's a practicing GP in Centurion, and of course Dr. Maurice Goodman, who's the Chief Medical Officer for Discovery Health. Let's start with you. Or perhaps let me start with Dr. Goodman. All right, I'll come back to you now. We just before the break, we started chatting a little bit about that skill about running a practice with GPs. Your comments on that?
So thank you for that. As I mentioned, the quality of the clinical training that our doctors get in South Africa is world class. What's lacking at the undergraduate level is any kind of business training. If you think about a young doctor either going straight from their community service or having spent a few years perhaps in the public sector and then opening a practice, essentially they're running a small business. and yet they've had very little, if any, formal training in how to open a business and how to run a business. And that leads to quite a lot of complications. From Discovery's perspective, we've been speaking through our foundation, etc., to the various medical schools to encourage them and try to fund some kind of business training at an undergraduate level so that the doctors, once they go in, either into public sector, because quite frankly they'll quite quickly find themselves running a ward or running a department, or in private sector, the importance really of knowing how to run a business, private or public, is important.
Perhaps let's get your perspective. I mean, did you get formal training on how to run a practice, or is it just asking people around and, you know, just
I must say
trial and error?
You hit the ground running, and a lot of trial and error, to be very honest. I do agree that that is the one area that could be improved upon in our undergraduate studies, because you come out ready as a clinician, but you're not well equipped as a business entity or business owner. And that does take a lot of trial and error for you to actually find your feet. And it is something that definitely could be improved upon, because I, for one, did not have any formal training.
Talk about training. I mean, the earlier clip that we played, I mean, had issues there, comments such as, you know, the quality of care that I get from a GP. And I think there was some mention around, you know, if you want better care, you need to pay more and go see a specialist or something like that. And but at the same time, somebody spoke about an expert GP or a good GP that knows. So let's talk about training. I mean, GPs or doctors go through formal training, they qualify, they set up practice. Is there a need for them to keep studying going forward?
Certainly there is. I think in any profession, and particularly medicine, where the room for error is very small, as close to zero as possible, there's definitely a need to do that. Through our Health Professions Council, there is a requirement for every doctor to maintain a certain number of hours of ongoing training. In South Africa, it's called CPD, our Continuing Professional Development.
Right.
It's very similar in the rest of the world. They tend to call it CEU or other. But certainly, there is a minimum number of hours of additional training every year that the doctors have to go through by law to maintain their license.
And the benefits to the public?
Well, clearly, it's medicine is a rapidly changing profession and science, and it's critical. It's critical to keep up to date with all the new technologies, the new medications, the new diagnoses, etc. is very important.
Let's get your perspective around, you know, some people believe that, you know, GPs, yeah, you know, some of them, they don't know so much as compared to a specialist. Yeah, I'll go to a GP if I need a note, a sick note, because I didn't go to work. Just take us through your practice. What do you experience?
Your GP is your family doctor. Your GP is your first point of care. There's a reason why your GP is the first person that you should see with any ailment that you have. I always say to my patients, as an example, if you're experiencing palpitations, which is an awareness of your heart beating fast, and you run to your cardiologist, you could go to your cardiologist, be then referred to a psychiatrist, be then referred to a gastroenterologist, and it could go on endlessly. The amount of money spent on that, the amount of time wasted in getting to an appropriate diagnosis, investigating it correctly and treating it correctly could have been minimized completely by going to your primary healthcare practitioner. We are the gateway for your healthcare, and we are here for your well-being, and that's exactly why you should see your GP first.
Right. So let's come back. I mean, clearly, so the message here is that the GP, in terms of the level of skill, is superb. Okay. And what is Discovery then doing to support? I would imagine you have a network of your own GPs. Right. Are there programs that you have in place to support the continual development of the GPs?
Definitely. Obviously, we don't hold ourselves out to be the clinical experts. So what we do is we partner with groups, some of the IPA, independent practitioner associations, where GPs have grouped themselves into typically regional groupings, and we work with those bodies to encourage and incentivize their members to learn more. They tend to hold skills workshops where they remind and refresh their memories on various techniques as well as knowledge. And just coming back to the previous point, I don't think it's fair to say the quality of specialist care is better or worse than the quality of GP care.
Right.
It's very different. Clearly, specialists know a lot more about their area of specialization, but I would argue to be a good GP is probably more difficult because one's got to be alert to. Now, I guess the vast majority of one's patients may not have life-threatening illnesses, but a small percentage will be in trouble. And the skill of a GP is to be able to identify those serious cases and refer them to the appropriate specialist. As my colleague said, palpitations could come from a number of different body systems, and just to assume and run to a cardiologist might be the wrong call. Whereas your GP would be able to, in most cases, treat you very effectively themselves, and in the minority of cases refer you, but the first time, to the correct specialty. So I think that's an important point to make.
We had a question from the floor earlier, and this, I guess, relates to the issue of running a medical practice as a business. So the complaint or the question is, but why is it that when you go visit some doctor, you pay 650 rands, and you go to another doctor, you pay 750 rands? Who determines how much a consultation fee, let's stick with the GP, should be?
So there's some history to that question. It's actually an excellent question. If one rewinds, I think it was about 6 or 7 or perhaps more years ago, there are two bodies in the business of medicine. So there's SAMA, the South African Medical Association, and then there's a body called BHF, of the Board of Healthcare Funders, that represents a number of the funding organizations. What used to happen is those two bodies, SAMA would sit down and come up with a particular fee which doctors would charge, say in this case that GPs would charge for a consultation, and the funding body would sit down and decide what the funders would pay. Certain doctors in those days then could choose to be contracted in, as it were, to what the funders would pay, or they may choose to charge the typically higher rate that the medical association determined the right fee. But it was simple. Either had a contracted in or contracted out doctor. A number of years ago, however, there was a competition commission that held that kind of behavior was anti-competitive, and you couldn't have doctors sitting together and colluding around what they should charge, and funders sitting together and colluding around what they should pay. So what then happened is each doctor was tasked with setting their own fee, which makes sense from a competition's point of view. From a patient's point of view, as you pointed out, it becomes really quite difficult then to navigate and understand what is the appropriate fee, etc. So what most funders, ourselves included, then did is we set up networks of general practitioners, and one of the conditions of the network was to agree to charge a certain fee, and that fee we could then communicate to the members of the scheme we administer, and then they know that if they go within that network, that will be the fee they charge. If they choose to go outside the network, they need to speak directly to their doctor to understand what that doctor will charge.
I mean, it's obviously a complex and very important area because it links to the issue of the cost of healthcare. But I mean, that's a much broader discussion, which perhaps can be a show on its own. Okay. At this point, again, we go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we continue our discussion on the role of the GP. Please stay with us.
Africans are increasingly using digital platforms for life, work and play.
Information is key for us. We live in an information age. We live in the digital age.
I'm mostly on WhatsApp because not all my friends have iPhones, so they don't have FaceTime.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's technology and social media landscape. And some here are using the internet to raise political concerns.
Some of the exposés on political issues come from what we call your diasporic online media.
Africans are also using technology to create. For African technology and social media news, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 9 p.m.
What guides us? Is it something you can see?
We need
hear, feel, or touch? What leads us onto greater experiences? Is it the words of our sacred texts? The advice of our elders? Or is it the actions of our people? The strength of our beliefs? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people, and your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. We're discussing the role of the GP, and with us is a practicing GP, Dr. Kabelo Motsepe, who is in private practice in Centurion, and with her, Dr. Maurice Goodman, Chief Medical Officer, Discovery Health. Now, I believe we have two callers on the line. We'll take these two one after the other. First up is Virginia from Johannesburg. Virginia, welcome to Health Talk.
Hello, doctor.
Your question or comment, please.
Comment na nga prefer le question le kupa le advice ko bo doctor.
Yes.
Comment yaka ki prefer the GP because of the you can attend and you can express yourself.
Right.
That problem on a linyona and na khona di queue this is.
Right.
So and then make ko advice ko bo doctor. Ngani certificate ke lenga di attend mo di community center.
Yes.
Around Konomokidulante. So, certificates are 2 days attendance, first aid level 1.
Yeah.
It was sponsored by Department of Labor, National Skills Fund. And other certificate is 2 days attendance, health and safety phase 1.
Yes.
Yeah, the same sponsor. And then second key.
So, but advice, what sort of advice?
The certificate. Advice ke kopang ke gore di certificate tse so di kan thusa ka eng.
All right.
Because ke ile ka fail matric because of I was doing maths and science.
All right. Okay.
I'm not good in maths and science.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Virginia. I'll try and translate that a bit later. Let's take Mfana Futi from KZN. Mfana Futi, welcome to Health Talk.
Doctor, Doctor.
Skona kunjani baba?
Ngiyaclear baba. No, ngisangibuza uyihambele zakho lapho dokotela ukuthi mhlambe esimeni la othola ukuthi ena nangumuntu wesifazana mhlambe uzethwele sokushaya isikhathi ukuthi ayesibhedlela ayo deliver umntwana. So bese kubana nenkinga yayo ukuthi mhlambe mase lapha esibhedlela kufanele teste mhlambe akuteke izinto njengalezo mhlambe iyaqala noma ngithola umntwana. Bese kulandela lamadokotela lana ngathini awenza ama-practical izinto njengalezo abuye esikoleni. Mhlambe uthezokithisa lowo muntu thola ukuthi uma imhlinza laphana mhlambe enenze isiza laphana mhlambe aspecte ngendlela nathi awamhlinzanga ngendlela e-right thola ukuthi amhlinza indawo yalowo ngithola ukuthi sokuphangalela yena phinde kuphangalela nomntwana esimeni esikanjalo dokotela ngifisa ukubuza lokhu uyihambe zakho lapho nakuwena dokotela ukuthi mhlambe kuyakwenze njani because
Okay. Thanks.
Lokho baba kwenzakala kwesihlobo sami kodwa kwathola ukuthi isibhedlela leso asisuwanga mhlawumbe kumele sekanjalo dokotela uyawenze njani ngiyabonga.
Thank you so much, and maybe if I could just appeal to everybody else to try and limit the questions to the role of the GP in the healthcare system, but let me try and deal with the first one. The first one, Virginia from Johannesburg, her first comment was that, look, she prefers to consult a GP because she feels more comfortable, she can express herself more freely as compared to when she speaks to a specialist, which is a good point. But the second point is that she's a member of the public that has not had the opportunity to go beyond matric, but she's attended these 2-day courses where she gets trained on first aid and whatever else. And how useful are these courses? It's a difficult one. Let me direct it at you, Dr. Goodman.
I think the more empowered and trained the public is, the better.
Right.
We've talked about the shortage of doctors, the shortage of healthcare workers generally.
Yeah.
And typically, and particularly in a case of an emergency, often the first few minutes, first half an hour is critical.
Yeah.
So the more that the public can upskill themselves, the better. I think that should be encouraged.
Right. The second one, and I'll try my very best to try and translate it, what I pick up from what Mfanamputi was saying is that he's in a situation where the wife is expectant and has to go to a hospital, but he's heard stories, or there's possibilities that when the wife goes to hospital and has to have an operation, and the doctors that often attend to patients, some of them are still doing practicals and not as experienced as the more senior ones. And he's thinking now, what will happen if things go wrong?
My guess from that scenario is that the call is probably referring to a public hospital.
Correct, yes.
In which case you have a hierarchy. The doctors who first see the patients and clerk the patients would tend to be the interns, the housemen, the more junior doctors, but certainly they are under the care and the observation of the more senior doctors.
All right, sure. So we're obviously doing our best to try and respond to the questions,
yes.
But like I said earlier, please, if we could just try and get our questions that focused a lot more on the role of the GP. Let's get back to what we're talking about now, the GP. And let's get back to that issue around people saying we prefer the GP, we prefer the specialist. And you made an excellent point earlier to say the GP is the first point of contact. Just expand on that a little bit. Why is that important?
It's important because we would be your primary healthcare practitioner. So I suppose in an urban area you have the option of either a clinic or you could go and see your general practitioner. And the importance of that is that we would be the gatekeepers in terms of the healthcare system as a whole, and ensuring that you get referred accordingly for your ailment. We need to understand that if we're talking about limited numbers of doctors for the population that we have to serve, it really becomes a situation where we need to be wiser about how we spend time and how we spend money in the healthcare circle with regards to dealing with patient ailments and referrals. We cannot inundate specialists with minor ailments whereas they could be dealt with at primary healthcare level. Another thing is you also become a coordinator of care as your GP, because you would then know who you've referred your patient to for what ailment, and if something else should happen to the patient in addition to that initial referral, you become part of that multidisciplinary team that actually manages the patient correctly.
Right.
And
okay. So clearly, I mean, the message is quite clear that, she mentioned an excellent phrase, the care coordination, which I would imagine in the medical aid space is quite critical.
Yeah.
We're seeing a huge burden of disease,
Yes.
non-communicable diseases that's upon us. From a medical scheme's perspective now, the importance of care coordination and perhaps the benefits.
So that's critical. I think you both alluded to the non-communicable diseases. I mean, South Africa, we're very familiar with our communicable diseases, our infectious diseases, our HIV, AIDS, TB pandemic that's certainly ravaging the country. However, the tsunami of non-communicable diseases like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and then respiratory diseases like asthma, etc., are in fact starting to dwarf that. This is a global phenomenon. There was in fact a discussion at the World Economic Forum in Davos at the beginning of the year, looking at the impact of this tsunami on the world. So it's a global phenomenon, but in South Africa we're particularly impacted, and particularly with type 2 diabetes. Now, that's a disease that affects many body systems, and we would see from a funding point of view some of the members of the schemes who administer perhaps visiting 3 or 4 or 5 different specialists, a cardiologist, a surgeon, a urologist, an endocrinologist, and often those doctors don't know what the other doctor's done. What's absolutely critical in dealing with those diseases is to have a GP or a family practitioner as the coordinator of care, who can then call in the various specialists as required, but critically looking after the whole patient in a coordinated and holistic fashion.
Okay, we're going to go for a quick break, but before we go on a break, let's take Nkosinati from Johannesburg. Nkosinati, welcome to Health Talk.
How are you?
We're good. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. My question is, why do GPs probably transfer you to government hospitals or private hospitals for scan or any x-rays, and after you pay them?
Sir, I'm not getting the question. Why do GPs do what?
Refer you to public government hospital or private hospital for CT scans or x-rays, and normally you pay for the GP as well.
All right. Okay. We get the question. We're going to please stay tuned, because we're going for a quick break. When we come back, we'll answer that question and, of course, carry on with our discussion. Please stay with us.
With the stories of abuse from the other 8, but they haven't been ready to pursue any angles. They've offered their support. They've offered the comfort to the 8, and it's been an amazing journey.
It feels like your heart actually literally sunk in your shoes.
It wasn't a long encounter. I think at the time I froze.
The way the criminal justice system deals with sexual violence is problematic. And I don't know, unless there's a fundamental change in many things, the way prosecutors deal with the victim in the matter.
For all investigative insights, stay tuned to Special Assignment every Saturday at 17:30.
What guides us? Is it something you can see?
We need deliverance from sin, because God never
Hear?
carry on working to spread the message
Feel?
to the whole world.
Or touch? What leads us onto greater experiences? Is it the words of our sacred texts? The advice of our elders? Or is it the actions of our people? The strength of our beliefs? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people, and your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
What is the public's view on the competence of the general practitioner compared to a specialist?
Specialists are more qualified than the doctors.
I wouldn't really say I choose a GP or specialist, but the thing with the GPs, they won't tell you if they can't treat the symptom. So you'll end up finding yourself going 3 times instead of if you go once and then they tell you, no, we can't do this. They'll charge you, and then you still go to the specialist and you still pay more money, which is totally unfair. And they can't even refund you your money back, which happened to me. That was like 4 years ago, and I almost lost my life.
When you have a serious illness, I would prefer that you can rather go to a specialist directly. When you don't need a general practitioner, because if it is something like cancer, you have to pay a general practitioner. It's additional money that goes from your medical aid, and instead of going directly to a specialist that can diagnose you directly. And I think that is just, your medical aid is not like, the money doesn't go out of your medical aid immediately for a general practitioner instead of a specialist. And I think a specialist can actually diagnose you so much sooner than going directly to a general practitioner all the time. So I would prefer rather to go to a specialist directly. Although, you know, there's a lot of this specialists that is contracted into the medical aids, you know, that are actually asking medical aid rates. So it's much better to go to a specialist that knows what they're talking about. Even, you know, even if it is something, a specialist that is actually working with kidneys or something like that. You would prefer a person that knows what's happening with kidneys than going to a person that doesn't know or that's just a general practitioner.
I think it depends on the kind of sickness that I would be having. If it's something general, then I'd rather go to a general practitioner. But if it's something that really requires skilled practitioners, then I'd rather go to a specialist.
Yeah. So clearly this is a problem. There's still people out there who have these views, and perhaps linking back to the previous question, the question from the caller was, I think it was Nkosnati, was that I go and visit my GP, pay my consultation fee, but afterwards I'm still referred somewhere else where I'm expected to pay again. Let me give it to my guests. Please, I need a response, and I think let's particularly deal with some of the issues that we've heard. Let's start with you.
I think the first thing that the caller needs to understand is that your GP is not a radiologist. Radiologists are the ones who actually do your scans, your x-rays, etc. And they are doctors, true, like me, but who have specialized for 4 more years to become a radiologist. So a general practitioner, yes, is still your first point of care, but they would not be able to actually do an x-ray on site. The machinery, the infrastructure it takes to do all of that is way out of our scope of practice.
I don't know, is healthcare like a commodity that you pay for and come back and say, okay, you know, this is what I got? I mean, this concept that if I go to this one person, I must come back, you know, so I pay money and I must get service that sorts out all my problems. Please help us.
Yeah, well, I guess the way the public system works, it is a much more coordinated system where typically you would get more of a sort of one-stop shop, if you will. Our private sector is fragmented. In some cases, that's legitimate. As my colleague said, the cost of radiological equipment, etc., is significant. So you wouldn't expect each GP or specialist, for that matter, to have that kind of equipment. The same goes for laboratories where they do blood tests, etc. On the other hand, there certainly is a need within the system to coordinate care much more effectively, as we were discussing earlier. And the concept of group practices, where you can have multidisciplinary groups of doctors and, in fact, other health professionals sitting together in a group, in a team, giving a much more coordinated, holistic service to patients, is certainly one that we're working towards.
Some of the views that we heard there, and clearly, I mean, this is a problem. There are still people who believe that, I think the one lady said that, look, it's best to go to a specialist who knows what he's talking about, rather than go to a GP, the suggestion being that a GP doesn't know what he or she is talking about. Your comment on that?
Our training is adequate for us to be able to make a diagnosis correctly, to investigate your condition thoroughly, and refer you timelessly to the necessary specialist that you need to see. That is why our training takes the number of years that it does. And it is very sad when you hear people in our community not understand the role of the GP. Our role is here to make sure that we take care of your health, your well-being. We also want to practice preventative medicine as well, and make sure that we ensure the longevity of a healthy life for you going forward. Specialists are specialists. We can't take away their role. We can't take away what they do for each patient in their disease entities, but their scope of practice will always be limited to their speciality. And that is why you can never say that you only ever consult specialists, because they will only look at exactly their area of expertise. And most disease entities can present with a myriad of symptoms and signs that require that you have a GP who can actually ascertain what those symptoms mean and put a diagnosis to it and refer you to the correct specialist. I mean, every GP's nightmare, I think, is Google. I call it Dr. Google. Dr. Google will have you either in an ICU bed or dead in 5.3 clicks. And Google cannot replace the role of the GP, because I will tell you that you are alive and breathing, you've walked into my practice, and you will walk out. You might walk out with a prescription and medication for your symptoms, but you're not on your deathbed.
Very passionate response. But let's get back to, from the medical scheme's perspective now. Do you enforce a GP specialist referral? Because, I mean, this is a problem. People still want to go directly to specialists.
So I can't match the passion, but certainly I can absolutely endorse everything that was said. If you look at many of the top healthcare systems in the world, Australia, the UK, systems in the US like Kaiser Permanente, they mandate, obviously emergency aside, that their members, their patients, their population have to consult with a GP before they get on referred to the appropriate specialist. I mean, look at it from the other perspective. Somewhere, somebody's making the decision to go to the specialist. What the patients in those clips were saying is they trust their own judgment, because they're now self-diagnosing either with the help of Dr. Google or their colleagues, their T friends or whatever. They're self-diagnosing and deciding which specialist to go to. I don't think they should bet on their own knowledge rather than that of the GP who's very well trained. Our specialist colleagues as well don't appreciate patients coming straight off the street, as it were, to see them. They're highly trained. They want to be practicing at the top of their licenses. Take hypertension, for example. Many patients would go straight off the street to be treated by their cardiologist for hypertension, whereas 95% of that should be treated by their GP. That means, as we were talking earlier, with the shortage of both specialists and GPs in this country, that's a huge inefficient use of very expensive resources. So one definitely should encourage, in some cases where one can mandate, but otherwise encourage patients to go to their GPs first, obviously not in emergency situations.
Well, folk, I hope the message is loud and clear. The GP is well trained and is capable enough to diagnose what your problem is and is best placed to decide which specialist, if any, you need to see. Well, we need to thank our guests, Dr. Maurice Goodman, Chief Medical Officer, Discovery Health, and Dr. Kabelo Motsepe, practicing GP out in Centurion. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Well, please remember that you can join us again next week, same time on SABC. And if you missed any of our previous shows, you can always catch them on YouTube. I'm Dr. Sello Matang. Please do take care. Cheers.